Breaking news tonight, all three Louisville police officers cleared of charges in the death of Breonna Taylor.
One of the officers who has since been fired is facing criminal charges for firing his gun into Taylor's neighbors' homes. The Kentucky Attorney General announcing the decision from a grand jury today, saying the officer's use of force was justified. Protests beginning in Louisville this afternoon and continuing into the night. You are looking right now at one of those protests. This is in Brooklyn in New York City.
Taylor's death back in March, sparking months of protests not only in Louisville, but across the country and in other parts of the world as well. Officers shot and killed the 26-year-old in her own home during a drug raid. Taylor was not the target of that raid. The officers entered her apartment while she and her boyfriend were in bed. Taylor's boyfriend says he thought someone was breaking in, and that's why he fired a shot. Kentucky Attorney General Daniel Cameron says the officers did not serve the warrant as a no-knock warrant and did announce themselves at Taylor's. He says the evidence shows they acted in self-defense when they returned fire.
Former Officer Brett Hankinson is facing 3 counts of wanton endangerment, once again not connected to Taylor's death. Cameron says Hankinson fired his gun 10 times. Sergeant Jonathan Mattingly and Detective Miles Cosgrove were not charged. News Nation's Nicole Burley is live in Louisville tonight with more on today's announcement and also reaction. Nicole?
Well, Joe, speaking of reaction, a large caravan of cars just drove by, loudly honking their horns. The city has been preparing for this announcement all week. You can see there's that police presence behind me. There's that large truck, the barricades. They're blocking access to downtown Louisville. And we also know the governor has authorized a limited deployment of the National Guard, and the mayor has imposed a curfew, which begins at 9 o'clock local time. After 6 months of investigating, an announcement from Kentucky's Attorney General on the Breonna Taylor death investigation.
The grand jury voted to return an indictment against Detective Hankinson for 3 counts of wanton endangerment.
Former police officer Brett Hankinson indicted by a grand jury after the Attorney General said he fired 10 bullets, some of which went into an apartment adjacent to Breonna Taylor's. The Attorney General saying 2 other officers, Jonathan Mattingly and Miles Cosgrove, both fired shots that March night, including what he called the fatal shot that killed 26-year-old Taylor. They're not being indicted.
Our investigation found that Mattingly and Cosgrove were justified in their use of force.
Just a few hours after the announcement, we talked to some protesters in downtown Louisville, where people have been gathering for months.
That's not right. That's not right. All the officers should be arrested.
We didn't get justice today.
Honestly, was not surprised. I think that what we saw today is historic of how black folks have been treated in our nation.
Ben Crump, an attorney for Taylor's family, writing on Twitter, quote, "If Brett Hankinson's behavior constituted wanton endangerment to people in neighboring apartments, then it should also be considered wanton endangerment of Breonna. In fact, it should have been ruled wanton murder." Attorney General Cameron saying the investigation took months, with interviews as recent as last Friday. The case then presented on Monday. So News Nation asked how long the grand jury deliberated.
How long did they deliberate? Did they begin on Monday or did they begin Tuesday? And that was of this week, correct?
I will say that they started early Monday and concluded sometime before noon. And so they heard everything they needed to hear.
The Attorney General says it's unlikely there will be any additional charges related to the shooting, and adds that he understands that some people in the community may be hurting.
Criminal law is not meant to respond to every sorrow and grief, and that is true here. But my heart breaks for the loss of Miss Taylor.
All right, you can hear those caravans of people going by right now. Do want to let you know, wanton endangerment is a felony. It carries a punishment of up to 5 years in prison and a $10,000 fine. As you can see, demonstrators are out. We know the demonstrators are gathering behind the barriers that are behind you. I can tell you, when we were back there, I did see numerous people walking around with semi-automatic weapons. We do know that hours after that announcement, several people were arrested. Again, that curfew doesn't go into effect until 9 o'clock local time. Reporting live, Nicole Burley, News Nation in Louisville, Kentucky.
Nicole, thank you. Meantime, the attorney for Sergeant Mattingly issued a statement to News Nation saying, quote, the grand jury's decision to not indict Sergeant Mattingly or Detective Cosgrove shows that the system worked and that grand jurors recognized and respected the facts of the case. The death of Breonna Taylor is a tragedy, but these officers did not act in a reckless or unprofessional manner. They did their duty, performed their roles as law enforcement officers, and above all, did not break the law.
Kentucky Democratic Governor Andy Beshear is asking the Attorney General to release any information possible without jeopardizing today's charges. He says the public deserves to see the facts.
So I previously made what I would call a suggestion to the Attorney General, and now I'm making the request that he post online all the information, evidence, and facts that he can release without impacting the 3 felony indictments, the 3 felony counts in the indictment issued today. Everyone can and should be informed. And those that are currently feeling frustration, feeling hurt, they deserve to know more. I trust Kentuckians. They deserve to see the facts for themselves. And I believe that the ability to process those facts helps everybody.
Now turning back to the night of Breonna Taylor's death. It started with a judge issuing a no-knock warrant for Taylor's home and then ended with some 40 bullets fired. It was after midnight on March 13th, Louisville, Kentucky. It started as 3 local officers serving a warrant as part of a drug investigation. Breonna and her boyfriend, Kenneth Walker, are in bed. 3 officers arrive at the front. Exactly what happens next inside Taylor's apartment depends on whom you ask. Louisville police say they have a no-knock warrant and announced their presence. Taylor's attorney, Benjamin Crump, says the couple never heard anyone identify themselves, even after asking who's there. According to police documents, officers forced their way in. Walker calls 911. It's unclear if the call came before or after shots were fired. 12:43 a.m., 3 minutes after police arrived. Walker, who is a licensed gun owner, opens fire. Police say Walker shot one of the officers in the leg, puncturing his femoral artery. Shots hit the living room window, the ceiling, the kitchen, a clock on the wall, even the homes of neighbors. This is an audio recording from the scene.
Is she alert and able to talk to you?
No, I'm breathing.
Okay.
I'm breathing.
Kentucky's Attorney General says 6 bullets struck Breonna Taylor. She's pronounced dead at 12:48, 5 minutes after police entered the house. By 1 a.m., police arrest Walker and eventually charge him with attempted murder. Prosecutors on May 22nd announced they were dropping those charges. That was 1 day after the FBI announced it had opened an investigation into the shooting.
Other protests in response to today's grand jury decision are happening across the country. News Nation correspondent Tom Negevin is live in Brooklyn for us tonight in New York City with more. Tom?
Right, you know, Marty, we started at the Barclays Center here in Brooklyn, and thousands of people are now marching through the streets of Brooklyn toward Manhattan to join other protests. What's been very interesting as we watch the crowd pass us by is this building throughout the day across the island of Manhattan, across the 5 boroughs of New York City. It didn't build with an eruption of anger immediately following the grand jury announcement in Kentucky, but rather very slowly, very methodically, in rather orderly fashion across social media, and led to various protests around the city. We were at one at Union Square earlier tonight. A lot of anger there, a lot of vitriol directed toward law enforcement, toward the justice system in America, toward racism in America, toward the system that people feel oppresses people of color in this country. And now we're seeing across the city folks from all walks of life, all backgrounds, joining together and in a very orderly and peaceful thus far fashion, marching to join other protests going on in New York City, on the island of Manhattan. This one in Brooklyn, though, the largest thus far. A couple of thousand people marching to join the other protests now under the watchful eye of the NYPD, which sources are telling News Nation is preparing for a very long night, hoping for the best. But given what New York has been through over the summer, prepared for just about anything this evening. Of course, we'll be following along. Live in Brooklyn, Tom Negovin, News Nation. Back to you in Chicago.
Big crowd. Tom, thank you very much. President Trump also responding to the news about today's grand jury decision during a White House news briefing.
Well, I thought it was really brilliant. Kentucky Attorney General Daniel Cameron is doing a fantastic job. I think he's a star. And he made a statement that I'll just read. Justice is not often easy. It does not fit the mold of public opinion, and it does not conform to shifting standards. It answers only to the facts and to the law. If we simply act on emotion or outrage, there's no justice. Mob justice is not justice. Justice sought by violence is not justice. It just becomes revenge.
Joe Biden spoke to reporters before leaving a campaign event in North Carolina tonight. He said he had not seen the report on the Breonna Taylor case, but encouraged protesters to, quote, not sully her memory by engaging in any violence.
Thank you, Britt. A curfew just went into effect in Louisville, Kentucky. It will last for at least 72 hours. Protesters have been marching through the streets for hours following the grand jury's decision today not to charge any of the officers directly for Breonna Taylor's death. Tonight, 2 Louisville officers were shot. The police chief says both officers are okay. One person's in custody. The National Guard is also in Louisville tonight.
No peace.
The grand jury charged former officer Brett Hankinson with 3 counts of wanton endangerment. It's a Kentucky law that means someone put another person in serious danger. The charge was not for killing Taylor, but for shooting into her neighbor's apartment. No one inside that unit was injured.
In this moment, a moment of pain and anger for many, I have a message to the good people of Louisville. Let's turn to each other, not on each other.
Hankinson is one of 3 officers who fired shots. No other officers have been charged. But Louisville is just one of dozens of cities tonight holding demonstrations, including right here in Seattle. King 5's Tony Black's in downtown Seattle tonight with the latest here. Tony.
Yes, hello, Joyce. We are here outside of the federal courthouse. This is where tonight's march ended. It began shortly after 7 p.m. at Westlake Park, all as a candlelit vigil and subsequent march for Breonna Taylor. Now, this event was organized shortly after, or after the charging decisions were made earlier today in Kentucky. Many people who came here had signs that read "Black Lives Matter," "Say her name," and one particular sign said, "History isn't over yet." And that was the sentiment from organizers here tonight as well, that this is not just some one-off and they will not just take this and stop protesting. And they say, despite the news today, the fight continues.
You have to recognize that our lives literally matter. It's not just a hashtag. We are dying, and then after we die, 194 days later, we want to come to a verdict that they already knew 2 days afterwards.
Now, after their opening speeches, they offered up that megaphone to people who wanted to get things off of their chest. Several people in the crowd took them up on that, many expressing their frustration, demanding more accountability from leaders, and saying how justice was not served.
This cannot stop here. We are to keep fighting. This is not the end. This is not the end. So we're not here to get you all charged with murder. We're here to dismantle the system that
Now, again, after that, they started marching up on 4th Avenue, made their way here to the federal courthouse. You can't see it from where we're at, but there is a memorial for Breonna Taylor right there in the center that they all gathered around, had a few more conversations, and quite literally, as we were coming on air, they are all starting to head home. Now, we also have some information that there are another protests going on in this particular area. We are monitoring those, and if we have any other updates on that, we will let you know. But for now, here outside of the federal courthouse in downtown Seattle, I'm Tony Black, King 5 News.
Tony, thank you. Well, President Trump and Democratic presidential nominee Joe Biden reacted to the decision today. The president called Kentucky's attorney general a rising star and offered this message to the black community.
I love the black community, and I've done more for the black community than any other president. And I say, with the possible exception of Abraham Lincoln, and I mean that.
Biden urged protesters to be peaceful.
Do not sully her memory or her mother's by engaging in any violence. It's totally inappropriate for that to happen. And she wouldn't want it, nor would her mother.
The officer who was indicted posted bail and is out of jail tonight.
Back here at home tonight, the Seattle Police Department is reacting to the City Council's decision to override the mayor and go ahead with budget cuts to the department. In a statement, SPD's Chief Adrian Diaz says the department is working with the mayor's office on next steps, adding it's their intent to keep the department as whole as possible. In 2020, he goes on to say, as we move into 2021 budget discussions, our primary commitment is to build trust and maintain public safety.